Hi, I'm Joe Lample, gardening expert and host of the Joe Gardener Show podcast and the Online Gardening Academy, here with another DIY gardening project. Ask any gardener and they'll tell you their number one reason for gardening in raised beds is probably because they can create perfect soil, so all their plants are going to thrive. And the beauty of this is it doesn't matter what type of native soil you're starting with, whether it's really sandy and it drains too well, or it's too heavy and it doesn't drain enough. By having raised beds, you can bring in that soil and add organic material and get the perfect soil combination. So let's talk about the ideal size of a raised bed. First consideration is you want the roots for whatever you're growing there to be able to spread out into their surroundings without running up against anything. So it needs to be wide enough for them to have room to explore and get those nutrients and water. Yet at the same time, you don't want the bed to be so wide that you can't reach into the middle of it without putting your hand down and compressing the soil. You never want to do that. So the ideal width is probably no more than 4 feet. That way you can reach into the middle of the bed from either edge without putting weight on the soil and compressing it. So 4 feet is typically the ideal width. 3 feet works well too. Now as to length, that really doesn't matter. That's more of a matter of personal preference and your budget and how it looks in the garden, but it really has no bearing on the growing conditions. So as you're considering your length and your width of your raised bed, the most important consideration is the width and no more than 4 feet. So let's talk about the height considerations of a raised bed. How tall should they be? At least 6 inches. Because you want those plants in those raised beds to have room for their roots to grow out and down, and 6 inches is usually okay. Now anything taller than that is gravy. These beds, they happen to be 18 inches tall. Do I need that much? No, but I love the ability for these roots to grow as deep as they want, and 18 inches is certainly more than adequate for that. But a happy medium is probably 12 inches, and that's a very common height. Now, about that soil. It can be brought into the garden and mounded up in wide rows or added to a frame structure. And if you have existing soil, you can simply add more soil as needed to fill out the area. But whether you're starting from scratch or mending an existing bed, ideally it's best to incorporate plenty of organic materials such as well-aged manure and compost, and even store-bought soil amendments. That way you're instantly improving the quality of your soil and adding slow-release nutrients for an extra boost. So by now you know one of the key goals for plants growing in our raised beds is that the roots can grow out and down as far as they would like. And the best thing we can do to allow that to happen is to focus on building great soil. And one of the key things you're looking for is great structure. And you can just tell by looking at this soil has great structure. But you can also do something I call the squeeze test. And that's simply taking a handful and squeezing it and looking at it binding together like that. You want that if it breaks apart easily as you disturb it, and it does. So that tells me I have great soil. It also tells me that this soil drains well, and that's super important. You never want soil that's so heavy that when you have plants in it, it just stays wet, and that's gonna rot the roots and the plant is gonna die. So here, that's not gonna happen. Really, this is the best of both worlds in that water drains through this adequately, and yet enough moisture is retained in the soil so these plant roots have just what they need. It's the best of both worlds. And finally, when it comes to the material you use to build your raised beds, you have a lot of options. One of the most common is pressure-treated pine. It's readily available and it's inexpensive. But some people have concerns because it is chemically treated. But fortunately, they've changed that formulation so it's not nearly the risk that it used to be. In my case, I like untreated wood. I like hardwood that's weather resistant. This happens to be cedar. These are 6x6 timbers, and they're 7 years old, and they're holding up great, but there are other weather resistant hardwood options too. But you have a lot of other choices. It really just comes down to your budget and the aesthetics and what works best for you, as long as you make it tall enough and wide enough for those plants to spread out, and you're creating great drainage and good structure. But the bottom line is, no matter what structure you use to build your raised beds, you can achieve the same great outcomes.